The LouieTeeNetwork is powered by MusicHead University. MusicHeads, classes in session. Turn me up. Enroll on YouTube now. Link is in the description.
Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to the Command Post Live. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. I, of course, am your Commander-in-Chief, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Number of topics to get to tonight. Washington made a move today. I thought they were done. I'm not going to even front. I thought they were done upgrading the front office. They add another piece. Talk about that here in a second. We're going to recap and react to episode 3, which is what I like to do with these summer series episodes, is I like to react to them and kind of recap them on Mondays. And so we had Logan Paulson on the summer series for episode 3. I thought he dropped a bunch of nuggets on us, man. He dropped a lot of gems on our melons. And it was a great conversation. And one of the things that it did, and talking to him, I knew 2012 meant a lot to him. Listening to him talk in other, places, various times talking about 2012 rather, I had no idea how much it truly meant to him. And he took me back. Listening to him talk took me back down 2012. And it's always great to get a different perspective. I mean, I'm a fan. Most of you out there are fans. So when we talk about 2012, we talk about it with a level of reverence, but it's always from our perspective. It was great to have a player's perspective and to talk about what the vibe was like in that locker room at that time, because as a fan, you couldn't tell us. I can't speak for anybody else out there. I can speak for myself. And I can tell you that I thought we were going to the NFC Championship game. I thought we would have beaten Seattle had Robert not gotten hurt. We'll go down that road. So I want to talk about what Logan had to say. And in doing that, we're going to ultimately relive 2012 once more. Because I could sense him getting frustrated. Also being nostalgic, but being frustrated by reliving that all over again because of what could have been. And then in him talking about how confident they were and how they felt like they could beat anybody, I started getting upset because I realized, in the moment in 2012, I thought we were capable of beating anybody as well, except for San Francisco, which I told him, I don't think you guys would have beaten the 49ers. But I thought you could beat anybody else, including the team that the 49ers played in the Super Bowl, the Ravens, who we beat in that regular season. I thought we could have beaten them had we somehow made it to the Super Bowl. But that's nor here nor there. I went back and watched, after his interview, I went back and watched some more 2012. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. Anyway. I digress. Let's get to the news of the day, though. Washington signs former Carolina Panthers general manager Scott Fitterer to an executive personnel role. Now, the terms of what he'll actually be doing weren't really disclosed. I told you, in the NFL, generally, if you want to hire somebody, you can give them a title. Okay, I try not to focus too much into titles after we get past the main ones. GM, assistant GM, director of player personnel, director of college scouting, director of pro scouting, that sort of thing. Once you get past some of those big time titles, whatever you want to name it, whatever you want to call it, like who even knows what Martin Mayhew's doing, right? Who cares? At this point, what Adam Peters is continuing to do is he's building a front office that is going to be so talented in terms of evaluating talent, because that's what this is all about. That's what Scott Fitterer's hire is all about. Now, you know, I told you social media is a dangerous place to be, so you have to be careful. When you make a hire like this, Panthers fans are going to jump in the comment section and they're scorned, right? He was there for 3 years. It didn't go well, and they're going to place the blame on him. Honestly, you could just place the blame on the owner, right? Being a general manager, half the battle is being in a position to do the things that you want to do the way that you want to do them, right? You can't have your hands tied behind your back, or you can't have one hand tied behind your back and expect to be able to do your job adequately. Hence, why we struggled for a quarter of a century here in Washington. Didn't matter who was in charge, and really, you never had a shot. That's why we never really had a true general manager here. And the one time we did in Scott McCloughan, he was sabotaged by Bruce Allen, right? Because you were already up against it with Daniel Snyder as the owner. And then usually there was some de facto buffer between you and the owner that was going to make it even more incredibly difficult for you to do your job, whether it was Vinny Serrato or then Bruce Allen. It was going to be incredibly tough for you to be able to do your job, because there was always going to be that yes man next to the owner that was going to make it tough on you to do your job, right? Which we never really had that guy. Usually that was the guy, whether it was Vinny Serrato or Bruce Allen. But in Carolina, Scott Fitterer was put in a tough situation with his ownership. You know, with them changing ownership, I think that happened in 2018 or something like that, 2017, 2018. They changed ownership, and their owner, David Tepper, terrible, right? And when your owner is telling you who you should select, like I can't tell you that Scott Fitterer, wanted CJ Stroud or not. I know Frank Reich wanted CJ Stroud, and I can't tell you what was said or what was done, but I can tell you what ultimately happened. The owner got his way and drafted. Now, again, I'm a Bryce Young guy. I was a Bryce Young guy. I still am a Bryce Young guy. I'm not sitting here and telling you something totally different now that we've seen how last year turned out. But ultimately, you should be able to select the guy that you feel like is going to change the fortunes of your franchise. You shouldn't be told by your owner, this is who you're going to select, right? Like Daniel Snyder did here with, Jay Gruden and company when he pushed Dwayne Haskins on them, right? Whatever the case may be. Adam Peters could have taken interviews with the Tennessee Titans and the Arizona Cardinals. He elected not to. Why? He didn't feel like those were great opportunities. Those weren't great situations to walk into as a general manager, especially a first-time general manager. So it does matter where you go. So Scott Fitterer struggled in Carolina, but doesn't mean he's not a great evaluator of talent. And this is what I go back to with a guy like Scott Fitterer. And this is what you've seen Adam Peters do to this point, is surround himself with great evaluators of talent, because not only does he want his opinion to matter, which it ultimately will be because the final decision will be his, but you want to bounce ideas off of other guys. Hey, what are you seeing in this guy? Hey, are our opinions aligned here on this guy? Is this guy a commander? Do we put a commander's tag on this guy and say that he's one of the guys that we need to get in this draft, right? The more of those guys you have around you that you trust, that got it out the mud and are at their core true scouts and evaluators, the better off you're going to be from a roster standpoint. And we got at least 4 or 5 of those dudes who are hardcore scouts at their core, right? That's going to allow us to find those players, that 5th or that 6th round guy that's going to come in here and perform like a 2nd or a 3rd round guy. And that's going to help turn this organization around. And while people are going to try to shit on Scott Fitterer as if he can't evaluate talent or he was terrible, he might not have been ready for his opportunity in Carolina. It might have been a bad situation for him in Carolina. What I can tell you is that this man can identify talent. Now, I wonder if he my guess is the answer to this is yes. I wonder if he and Scott Fitterer are friends, right? Similar to Lance Newmark. He told us when they hired Lance Newmark, this is one of my best friends, right? This is one of the guys that I talk to on a regular basis, right? This is one of the guys that I have a really strong relationship outside of football, but we talk ball all the time. So it was nothing for him to bring Lance Newmark in here, who is a core scout. Like at his core, he is an evaluator of talent. Like if you just put him in a room and give him nothing else to do, Lance Newmark is going to watch film and evaluate players. That's what he does best, right? Scott Fitterer, I think, is another one of those type of guys. He started out at the bottom as an area scout and worked his way all the way up the food chain to become a general manager. And I think him and, when you're in that community, that scouting community, generally your paths are going to cross at some point. I think because him and Adam Peters became scouts right around the same time, right around 2000, right? 2000, 2004, in that same, window. So I think their paths probably crossed at some point. They probably had, some sort of relationship, even if it was just a mutual one where, hey, they see each other, they say what's up to each other and keep it pushing. But I think they knew of one another at a bare minimum. I also know that this is one of those hires of a guy that you respect, because Scott Fitterer was in the Seattle Seahawks organization for over 20 years. Okay. Similar to Adam Peters, who just grinded through different organizations, the Patriots and then the Broncos and then the 49ers. He grinded his way up to the top of the food chain. Fitterer did the same thing. So there's a mutual respect. But I just want to make sure you're clear that this is a guy that can evaluate talent. During his time in Seattle as the director of college scouting, right, which is what he was for, I think, let's call it a 10-year stretch from like 2010 to 2020 when he got the job as the GM. In 2021, I think, is when he got the job in Carolina. Here are some of the notable names that he drafted or helped the Seahawks draft. KJ Wright, Dick Sherman, Byron Maxwell, Malcolm Smith, who was the Super Bowl MVP, Bobby Wagner, who's here in Washington currently, future Hall of Famer. Dick Sherman may be a future Hall of Famer, we'll see. Russell Wilson, right, third-round pick. And then as a general manager, he had the foresight to sign a guy like Frankie Louvu, who nobody else wanted back in 2021. One of his first signings in Carolina was a guy named Frankie Louvu, who was discarded by the New York Jets, kind of just sitting out there floating around. And he had the foresight to see this guy, bring him in, and ultimately we see what Frankie Louvu has become. And I'm hoping that it ascends even further. But Scott Fitterer can identify talent, if nothing else. So you bring in another guy with an eye for talent. You can never have enough of those. Once again, another outstanding move by Adam Peters and this Commanders front office, adding another guy who is just a slam dunk hire in terms of being able to identify talent. You can't have enough of those. So let's see. Kevin the PRF says, man, we got chefs washing lettuce. I mean, that's how it feels right now. We got so many guys in here that are capable of being chefs, yet we've got them, doing things that we should have someone else doing, right? Someone lesser than them, someone lesser qualified than them doing. But that's how good of a front office it feels like we've built to this point. We'll see. Now, again, results are going to be ultimately what determine whether this was a successful collection of talent or not. But we'll see. I feel really good about what they've done to this point, just so we're clear. But I think you already know that. So let's get to the react to episode 3 of the summer series and my interview with Logan Paulson, which was just a blast. I had a blast. Logan's an awesome guy, really, really smart. And I thought that it was the answers that he gave to a lot of the questions that I had that's to me what makes for a great interview. It's because I'm not a guy, I generally don't go in with like a whole sheet of questions that I'm going to ask. I may have one or two questions just to kick off the conversation, and then we just kind of go from there. That's kind of how I am, because I want the conversation, the interview, to be more conversational than I do an interview, right? Where I ask you a question, you answer it, and then I go to the next question. Like, I don't think that's how a good interview goes. It should feel conversational, like we just sitting here chopping it up, having a conversation. The best podcasts that you probably listen to are like two dudes kicking it, having a good time, and just having a conversation. And that's how I want these interviews with the summer series, and in any interview that I do for that matter, but especially the summer series. That's how I want it to come off, right? So I thought he did a tremendous job of not only answering the questions, but allowing it to feel conversational. And before we get into his answers and us really diving in, I want to go back to the 2012 season, because a lot of what we talked about at the beginning of that interview was solely based off of the 2012 season. I asked him what was his favorite season. I knew the answer, but I wanted him to say it, right? I don't like to speak for people. You guys know that. And so I asked him about what was his favorite season. He said, of course, anybody that's a Washington fan knows that 2012, without a doubt, my favorite season. And here's the thing that really stood out to me, because I don't know if you guys watched the episode of the Super Friends that we just recently put out with Scooter Magruder, but there was a part of that episode in which there was a conversation that was being had about Washington and the home field advantage that we have or lack thereof, and how it doesn't matter who we play in the division, they're coming to take over our stadium. And I referenced 2012 in that brief exchange with them, where I said, look, you guys have no idea, because in the case of Brunson, he wasn't going to games like that back in 2012. I think his fandom kicked up a notch probably right around that 2016, 2017 season, when Wentz started to hit, and obviously they make the run to the Super Bowl. That's when his fandom, I think, kicked into high gear and he started going to games. I can't speak for him. I can only tell you that if you know, then you know. And clearly he doesn't know, right? So he wasn't going to games back in the day, and he wasn't really paying attention to what was going on here. But in 2012, that was our stadium. FedEx Field was our stadium. We ran that shit because they gave us a reason to believe. They gave us a reason to show up and cheer, right? And that's what we're hoping starts to transpire this year, right? That they give us reasons to want to show up, to want to be loud, to want to box out other fans from showing up and taking over our stadium. Look, it's always going to be Cowboys fans. There are always going to be Eagles fans. There are always going to be Giants fans that show up at these games. Always. We're a very transient area because of DC being what it is. It's just always, and it's a quick hop, skip, and a jump, right? A lot of Cowboys fans live in the area. The Eagles fans are, 2 hours away. Same with the Giants fans. So it's always good. And a lot of them live in the area as well, live in the DMV too. So it's always going to be that way. However, it can be less of that. It doesn't have to be 40% of their fans, 55, 60% of our fans. It doesn't have to be 55% of our fans to 45% of their fans. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be 80-20. It could be 90-10, right? We can box them out, and we did in 2012. Box them out. And the reason I bring that up is because Logan talked about being a part of a fan base that, and hearing the fan base and having these fans cheer for them. And he said it was the best fans in the country. I always think about college when somebody says in the country, right? Because that's a college term. Yeah, we say in the league up here around these parts. But a lot of these dudes, they talk with that college lingo. You hear a lot of people say around the country, right? It's a college term, but it speaks to how rabid the fan base was back in 2012, how starved we were, right? It felt like a college type atmosphere, which is why you can use terms like that, because we were locked in. We were locked. I remember, I still get goosebumps from 2 games in particular that season. The Monday night game against the Giants. Robert was not healthy. It was going to be tough. We were fighting for the division at the time, but we were on this heater. We didn't know that it was going to go the way that it went. We had lost to the Giants earlier that year. We talked about that. I talked about that game with Logan. We all remember that game, right? Had it, then we didn't have it, then we did have it, then we lost it ultimately, right? So we weren't sure if we were going to be able to beat the Giants. And we got it done. It wasn't pretty, but it was gritty. And the most important thing, it was a dub, and it felt so damn good. It was low scoring, something like 17-13, 19-17, something along those lines. But we got the shit done. And it was at that point, I can't speak for you. It was at that point where I said, we're about to do this shit. We just beat the Giants. Remember, the Giants won the Super Bowl the year before. They were the defending Super Bowl champions. Don't you forget that, okay? So we just beat the defending Super Bowl champions. We can do this. We can do this thing, right? We can do this shit. Then at that point, I was like, okay, we sweep in Philadelphia, which we ultimately went on to do. And then we had Dallas in week 17 for all the marbles. And that's the second game that I get goosebumps. The crowd, I don't know if I've ever heard the crowd louder at FedEx Field, now Commanders Field, but from its inception to the time that its entire time up until now that the name has changed and FedEx is no longer a sponsor, I've never heard FedEx Field louder than that home week 17 2012 contest versus the Dallas Cowboys. When Alfred Morris scored that last touchdown, first of all, my chest, I almost had a heart attack. Because I don't know if you remember that game, but initially, we weren't sure if he fumbled or not, right? Rob Jackson got the pick. We were up 21-18. Excuse me. We burnt off a ton of clock, got in the end zone, or at least we thought we did, and Alfred fumbled. Cowboys recovered that fumble. Initially, they're pointing that way, and I'm like, oh my God, if this is a fumble, we're gonna lose this game. Like, that's the kind of thought process you have when you're as scarred as we are, right? But quickly it was seen that he scored, the ball crossed the goal before it came out, and so it was a touchdown. At that point, we won the game. At that point, you're up 9, you kick the extra point, you're up 10 with less than probably less than a minute to go in the game, maybe a minute and some change left. But at that point, you're up 2 scores, game's done. And the roar of the crowd at that moment, I still get goosebumps thinking about it, knowing that we just defeated Dallas. Not only did we just beat Dallas, not only did we just clinch the division, not only are we going to the playoffs and playing a home playoff game, they're going home. There will be no bonus football for the Dallas Cowboys. Him talking about the feeling around the city, how they rallied around that team, how the crowd was so loud and engaged. I don't think people realize that this fan base, and I get it, that was over a decade ago. And we were in a different spot mentally as a fan base. We were still the Redskins then. I won't say we weren't that far removed from success, because we were, but the real apathy had not set in yet. There had been moments where fans were like, I'm over this shit, I'm sick of this shit, but you hadn't really quit yet. You hadn't given up yet. You hadn't thrown in the towel quite yet. I think 2013, the very next year, where there was the bickering back and forth and you could see Robert was deteriorating. You didn't know to what extent yet. I didn't give up on him until after the 14 season. That's when I realized this shit is over. And, you got the Shanahans going back and forth with Robert before games. That 13 season is where you get the Chiefs game at halftime. We're down like 45-10 or whatever the score was at halftime. And they got the pan shot of the stadium with the snow, and there is nobody there. And, that's when you start to realize this is really bad, right? It hadn't, the apathy hadn't really set in 2012. It's a little bit different now. They're going to have to win some fans back. The name change has definitely eroded some of the fan base too. That's a real thing. So there's damage that may be irreparable for some fans, but it's still a rabid fan base. It's still a sleeping giant, as someone once termed it. This is a fan base that winning will ignite them. You can wake this fan base up. 2012 was so magical from the standpoint of not only was it a run, we've been on runs before. We were on a run in 05. We went on a run in 07. We had been on runs before. That's not what made 2012. For me, I can't speak for anybody else. For me, what made 2012 magical and special was that it felt like the beginning of something big, real, and sustainable. That's what made 2012 feel so special. And Logan spoke to that. Like, it wasn't just that season. And he talked about in his life, he's played sports pretty much his entire life, especially his adult life. And he said, I had never been on a team before or since that played with that level of confidence. And you could see the confidence swelling with that team. And that's what made them so dangerous, is that we were scoring points. We were finding ways to win games. If we needed to score 17 and the defense had to hold the opposition to 16. Matter of fact, I think that Giants game might have been 17-16. What we did, whatever we had to do defensively to win. If we had to outscore somebody in a shootout, Robert and company were game for that. We put up 31 on the Eagles in the first contest. Obviously we went to Dallas on Thanksgiving, put up 38 on them, held them off, right? Whatever was necessary, they were capable of getting it done. And that's what made them scary, is that I felt like there was a level of confidence, which Logan talked about, that you just don't see often. Confidence is a dangerous thing. It can be fleeting sometimes, but when you have it, and I talk about what winning does. I said winning begets confidence, and confidence begets winning. It's a vicious, flavor delicious cycle, as I like to say. One begets the other, which begets the other, and it just goes in a circle, round and round. And if you can keep repeating that, all of a sudden, now you think you're invincible. Nobody can stop us. Nobody can beat us. We got to that Seattle Seahawks playoff game, and we jumped those boys 14-0, and they could not stop us offensively. We were going to run them out of the damn building. If Robert doesn't get hurt, and you saw what happened, he tweaked that leg, that knee on that second touchdown pass as he's falling out of bounds. He throws that dart for the touchdown. He tweaks that knee, right? If that never happens, he stays healthy, we're going to smoke those boys 38-14. It's going to be an ass kicking, and it's not going to be close, and we're going to have a party in wild card weekend. Obviously, we know that didn't transpire, and we know how the whole story ended. But to just go back, a bit with Robert in particular, what's crazy is you go back to 2012 and you go watch, and I'm a big culpability guy. Own your shit. All right. That's what I teach the youth of America. Own your shit. We all F up. Nobody's perfect. Own your shit. So I think he's gotten to the point now where he's taken on a little bit more responsibility for the deterioration of the relationship between him and the Shanahans and, you know, everything kind of dissolving the way that it did, he's not the sole, you know, person to blame. He's not the only person that, you know, was wrong in that situation. There's enough blame to go around, but he was a massive culprit. Him and his dad, you know, pretty much telling the Shanahans what they were and weren't going to do. And then, you know, Snyder was, you know, again, I'd put 50% of the issue on Snyder, probably 30% on Robert, and the other 20% on the Shanahans. Because if Snyder would have told him, that's your coach, you listen to him, don't come to me, all of that shit is dead and it's nipped in the butt. But instead, you know, he catered to his star players. They knew they could go over the coach's head, go straight to the owner and get shit done. And that allowed for that relationship to deteriorate the way that it did. That said, he's talked, you know, openly has Robert about, you know, some of the things that he did, and, you know, he wishes he would have done some things differently, but he still hasn't owned up to all of it. But that's in the past. At the end of the day, when I go back and I watch 2012, he threw some dimes in that season. And it just goes back to that confidence that I talk about all the time, how important it is to have confidence. A confident player is a dangerous player, because when you're confident, you're playing at the highest level that you can play at. When you're confident, you feel like, oh, you can't stop me, only I can stop myself. If I do the things that I know I'm capable of, it ain't shit you can do. And in that rookie season, Robert was playing like, bro, I'm still at Baylor. I'm still the Heisman Trophy winner, and it ain't a damn thing you can do to me. He had that level of confidence. He came into the NFL with that level of confidence, and it showed in that rookie season. There's some absolute darts that he throws in that season. There's a throw to Santana in the second Eagles game, off the injury, mind you, right? On one leg. Remember, he came back prematurely. He should not have played in that second Eagles game. The first game that he probably should have seen action in was the second Giants game. He came back way too soon. He could barely move on that leg, and yet he came back and he threw a dime to Santana in the back corner of that left end zone, the back left corner of the end zone. There's a little fade ball. Oh, my God. Drugstore cotton soft, feathery soft touch. Santana with the great catch, the drag, that toe drag swag, getting that second foot down and dragging it. That throw to Santana on Thanksgiving against the Cowboys. Are you kidding me? Right? Back shoulder, Tanner turns around and boom. I mean, it hit him like a bullet. Bam! Defender's right there. All Tanner had to do was spin, drag the feet, fall backwards. Are you kidding me? That throw to Santana against the Giants to take the lead in that same game me and Logan Paulsen were talking about, the game in which he extended that drive by catching that 4th and 10, and then he throws the dime to Santana to cap off that drive. That's a hell of a throw. He was spectacular in that rookie season. And then it's like all of a sudden that didn't exist. It did not exist. That next year when he came back, he didn't have that same accuracy. The team didn't respond to him the same way. It felt different. The energy was different. The vibe was different. He was different. I think his head blew up a little bit because when he first came in here, yeah, he was the shit and he knew it, but he hadn't arrived yet in the NFL. You know, the endorsements and all the things off the field might have suggested that he arrived, but his play in his rookie season said that, hey, I can call the shots. Until he did that, he didn't have that kind of power. It just felt different. The vibe and the energy was off the next year. But in 2012, the reason, like, we could sit here and talk about how, and Logan talked about how his play forced defenses to simplify their approach. They couldn't be too aggressive because if you came after him, all you had to do was hit Pierre or somebody on a quick hitter, and now you're in trouble. If you tried to be too aggressive attacking Alfred Morris, he could pull it out and he could run. If you attacked him, I'm going to just give it to Alfred Morris and let Alfred Morris run for 200 yards on you. You pick your poison. But we had teams in such a quandary, right, that it made the game easier for him. And as many easy throws on the drift route as he had, there were some tough throws that required precision and touch, and he made almost every single one of them in that rookie season. He was spectacular. I don't ever want anybody to lose. There's a reason why he won Rookie of the Year with Andrew Luck as a fellow rookie that year. There's a reason that Robert Griffin III won Rookie of the Year in 2012. He was amazing. And, you know, to hear Logan say that he really felt like he would have played his entire career here like, that's a profound statement. That had Robert stayed healthy, I would have played my entire career here in Washington. That's almost crazy to think that one player can affect another's career that drastically. Logan Paulsen played on 4 different NFL teams: Falcons, Texans, Bears, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about the Texans. I think he played on 4 teams, and of course here. Or excuse me, Falcons, 49ers, Bears, I think are the other 3 teams, not Texans. He might have played for the Texans too, and it might have been 5. Whatever the case may be. He's like, forget about all those other teams. Had Robert worked out here, Mike never gets fired. Kyle probably gets the baton passed to him. You know, I wanted to get into more things with Logan, but I wanted to respect his time because we had already pre-agreed on, hey, I just need to get out of here by, you know, such and such time. So I wanted to respect his time because I had a lot more. I had some follow-up questions on the play action because I really wanted to get to certain things about play action that we never even got to because we went in a totally different direction with it. And I wanted to bring it back full circle. I wanted to talk to him about the Shanahans in particular, but I didn't want to eat up all of the time that we had going down memory lane, right? And talking about other things because I still wanted to get to present day, talk about this current roster, some of the things that he's seen, what he can anticipate. And I wanted to get to some of those things. And again, I wanted to respect his time. Hopefully I'll get him on down the line again and we can go back and dive into some of those things and tie up some loose ends for me personally. But for him to say, if Robert works out here, I probably spend my entire career here. I mean, that's crazy to think. That's a profound statement that you're making, that this one guy's play could have led this franchise down a totally different path. And we know that's true. If you hit a home run, if you strike it rich at the quarterback position, no matter how downtrodden, no matter how down bad, no matter how poorly run your organization is, if you hit it out of the park with a quarterback, it changes everything. See Peyton Manning in Indianapolis, right? We can go on and on and on. See Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. It changes everything. So I just, you know, I did get upset listening to him talk and talking about 2012 and realizing, you know, all over again, which I already knew, and we've done this a million times. It really frustrated me going through that again because it didn't have to go the way that it went. And to me, that's another sign that under Daniel Snyder, we just weren't going to. It wasn't meant to be. It wasn't in the card. We weren't going to win as long as he was here. There was too much bad juju that he had surrounding this organization. We just weren't going to have nice things as long as he was here. I'm still waiting on my 30 for 30, by the way. I'm waiting for someone to go ahead and get that done. Corral about 10 to 12 players, 2 or 3 former coaches, Robert himself, get everybody's side of this thing, and I'm ready for my 30 for 30. I mean, he's been away from the game long enough. He works for ESPN. You know, I want Mike Shanahan involved if I can get him. You know, I get Kyle still coaching, and so it might be a little tough as he's still in the business. Usually you get your 30 for 30 when everybody's out of the game. But I need my 30 for 30. What the hell are you waiting on? Okay. It's been long enough. 2012 was over a decade ago. Robert's been out of the league now for 5-6 years. Let's go ahead and make it happen. Let's go ahead and I think what Robert's last year was probably like 2019 or so in the league. Let's go ahead and get this 30 for 30 going. What are we waiting on? Let's get this documentary kickstarted here. But man, 2012, what a season. What it could have been. It reminds me of Above the Rim with Shep, you know, and he said, you know, what we could have been. What we could have been, right? But they can't erase what we were. That's kind of how I feel about 2012. Anyway, let's go through the interview with Logan and kind of go through some of the conversation that we had and talk about some of the responses and things of that nature. So one of the things that I want to touch on real quick is he talked about how the league views undrafted players. And this was the point that I was trying to make all year last year about Sam Howell, right? Logan talked about how he knew he could play, but one of the things that was tough is that when you're undrafted, it means everyone in the league passed on you 7 times. And that's not always the case. Not everybody has a first or a second round pick, et cetera, but you get the point he's trying to make, right? The entire league said, no, I'm good. No, really, thanks. I appreciate the offer, but I'm good on this guy, right? So the entire league said, nah, you weren't worthy of a selection at any point. So there's always that stigma that's attached to you. This is how the league views you, and you've got to overcome essentially not being drafted. That's the same thing I would say about Sam Howell, and I would always say about him last year, which is he's a 5th round pick. People can't get past the fact that he's a 5th round pick. And they're going to keep throwing that out there as an excuse to ask why he can't do it, why he can't play. And so Logan talking about being undrafted, he's like, you know, every year I just worried about getting cut because, again, they didn't spend a draft pick on me. They could draft a 3rd round guy, and now they've got a new shiny toy, and you're not going to cut a 3rd round pick, right? You know, so what does that mean for me? It's the same thing. You look at the tight end position right now as we speak in Washington. A great example to bring it full circle is they got John Bates, right? They got Zach Ertz, and they brought him on board. They drafted Ben Sinnott. He's the new shiny toy. Where does that leave you if you're Cole Turner, right? You're a 5th round pick. They just drafted a guy in the 2nd round. Mind you, keep in mind that this group didn't draft you at all. So they're not tied to you in any way, shape, or form. You could have been a 2nd round pick and you can get cut because they didn't draft you. They didn't spend a 2nd round pick on you, right? So it's that kind of thought process. If you're an Amani Rodgers, I think he's the most talented guy out of the entire room. And listening to Logan talk, I think Logan kind of feels that way. I don't want to put any words in his mouth. And we'll get to the tight end position in a bit because we did have a quick conversation about the tight end position. But Amani Rodgers is undrafted. And even though I think he might be the most talented guy in that room, if they're only keeping 3 tight ends, they're going to keep the 2nd round guy over you. They're going to keep the veteran in Zach Ertz, and John Bates has a carved out niche and role that no one else can fill on this current roster. And so he's making the team by default. So, you know, it was interesting to hear him talk about how the league views undrafted players. So I asked him what was the difference between the Mike and Kyle era here in Washington, which he played for those two. He also played for Jay Gruden the first 2 years of Jay here. Logan was still on the roster. And then he talked about and then obviously he's here in a different capacity working for the team when Ron was here. And so I asked him, what's the difference between all three of those regimes and the one currently being constructed? And obviously the biggest difference is Snyder. And I thought he did a really good job because I should have did that for him by taking that out of the equation. I didn't. So he could have took the low-hanging fruit and just say, oh, it's ownership. That's the biggest difference. You're in a position now where guys have an opportunity to do their jobs without somebody undermining them, et cetera, et cetera. But he didn't do that. And I appreciate him for not taking the low-hanging fruit because it would have been easy for him to do so. But he said he kind of went through where each group struggled. And, you know, obviously we don't know. There is no proof here that this group is going to be successful. But what we do have is a collection of talent here, similar to 2012 that we saw, and we talked about that. Logan and I talked about all of the guys that were here, and we've, you know, obviously it's well documented. All of those coaches have gone on to have tremendous success in the league. And I think there could be a semblance of that. I'm not saying that we got 5 or 6 future NFL head coaches here in Washington right now, but I wouldn't be shocked if there are 3 or 4 currently on this coaching staff right now. Obviously, we've had guys that have gotten, you know, close as coordinators and things of that nature. Anthony Lynn is a former head coach in this league. Dan Quinn, obviously a head coach. Cliff Kingsbury is a former head coach as well. So you got 3 former head coaches on the staff. And then you got other guys like Brian Johnson, for instance, and I think Joe Witt Jr. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets a chance. I think he's going to whip this defense into shape. And I think we're going to be a ferocious group defensively. You guys know how I feel about this defense. And ultimately, that's going to turn some heads. He's going to get some interviews. And you can't tell me, you know, similar to when Eric Bieniemy first got here, except Bieniemy was hot air, right? Even when I go back and I watch that introductory press conference, he really didn't say shit. We just were excited because it wasn't Scott Turner, right? We just were excited because he came from Kansas City. It was a lot of, we were just excited because ... But when you really go back, there was a lot of emptiness. There was a lot of empty calories in the shit that he was saying. Not a lot of nutritional value. Joe Witt Jr. is a motivator, and there's substance behind the things that he says. Like, he's like, yo, we showing up 17, 18 deep, and we whooping people. Like, we not showing up here with 11 guys and these are my starters. Nah, we got a 17, 18 group deep collection of talent that we coming into your building, busting you over the skull and walking out with a dub. And that's how we conduct the business around here, right? So I think he's one of those guys, you get him in a room and he's going to wow you. The son of a coach, a guy that gets it. I could see him being a future head coach. But when you talk about this group here, he talked about Mike and Kyle. He said what they struggled with was managing personalities. Clearly they did, right, with Robert. And it wasn't all their fault, but a lot of it was. And then they didn't handle it like adults. Robert and his side of, and his crew handled it the way that they handled it. And they needed to take the high road, and they didn't, right? They fought fire with fire, eye for an eye, and it got ugly. He talked about Jay, and we all know that Jay's a great, fun-loving guy. We always used to talk about Jay and having a drink with Jay, and he said, look, Jay's a cool-ass dude. We all know Jay can scheme it up. He was the best offensive dude we've had here in Washington since Mike and Kyle, right? Jay kept the offensive vibes going when he got here. Jay just struggled with being a head coach, being an authoritative figure, right? Anytime your players are comfortable enough with you to give you a wet willy and to grab your nipple and shit like that, you haven't established clear enough boundaries. There's not enough respect for you as a figure that is in charge to be able to get the results that you're looking for. Hence, that final game in 2016 against the Giants, when Pierre was bitching and Deshaun didn't want to practice, it showed in that game, right? He didn't have a good enough handle on the players to be able to get them to do what it is he needed them to do. And that was his biggest problem. When you tell a player, hey, stop airing out dirty laundry in the media, and then DJ Swearinger looks you in your face and defies you after another game where he's disappointed and talks shit about the staff and practice again to the point where you got to cut him. There's not a level of respect there. I've always said it's easier to come in with that hammer and slam that bitch down and then ease up than it is to come in, want to be everybody's friend, and then when you need shit to happen and you got to be tough, now you try to slam the hammer down. Ain't nobody buying that shit. That ain't even who you are. We don't respect it. That was Jay's problem, and that's what Logan talked about. And then he talked about with Ron. Ron just had too much on his plate. Ron was overwhelmed, and you could tell. You know, Ron, I've said this a million times. Ron had no idea what he was signing up for. He had zero. Ron was so clueless. He was just upset that he got fired by the Panthers. He wanted to jump back in immediately. He probably needed to take some time, to be honest with you, or take another job. But he wanted to get back in immediately, which was fine, right? He called up people like Joe Gibbs. That was the wrong person to call, because Joe's always going to give you glass half full. That's just the person that Coach Gibbs is. He's always going to find the positives in a situation. You don't want to be here? That's fine. I appreciate you telling me, let me help you get out of here, right? Joe's going to find the positive, right? Dan Snyder is an interesting owner, but guess what? He's a good owner. He'll give you everything you need, because, of course, he gave Joe everything he wanted because it was Joe Gibbs, right? It was Joe Gibbs. So Joe Jackson Gibbs got whatever he wanted. You want to trade for Adam Archuleta, or you want to sign Adam Archuleta? You want to trade a second-round pick for TJ Duckett when it doesn't make any sense, but you want to block Philadelphia from getting him? So you want to waste draft capital? Go right ahead, do whatever you want to do. Joe's like, you just got to make it, you got to make him feel like it's his idea, right? But he's a good owner. No, he's not. But that's Joe. Joe's going to give you the most positive spin on it. And he didn't talk to the right people, because if he'd have talked to the right people, they would have told him, don't take this job. He walked into a buzzsaw and he got cut in half. His first year here, obviously, he couldn't have known that the name was going to change. He didn't know George Floyd was going to happen and that we were going to be all of a sudden woke, and that this whole climate of change was going to take place and we were going to get swept up in it. He had no idea that was going to happen. But he had to know that there had been a name change controversy swirling around his team for a very long time. He should have known that. He should have done his homework and understood who the owner was here and what he was getting himself into. You went from one shitty owner situation in Carolina with David Tepper to the worst owner situation in football here in Washington with Daniel Snyder. Like, where was the psychological sense in that? You need to wash your face and get your mind right. But Logan said it was impossible for him to juggle all of the different responsibilities that he had. My thing is, I just think he was in over his head. I don't think he ever truly realized what he was getting himself into till it was too late. You know, when he got here and he realized, I got to deal with all these accusations. And remember, there's a reason why Happy Thanksgiving happened and why Dan Snyder got Ronald Rivera here and said, hey, it's coach-centric, and pushed him out into the front. Because guess what? It's a shitstorm coming. I don't want anything to do with it. You're coach-centric. You're going to have to answer all of these questions. You're going to have to deal with all this shit. We got a Thursday night game, and there's an ESPN article with Dan Van Natta and, and Sam Wickersham, or, whatever the hell his name is. And you got to answer questions about this shit, 4 hours before a game. This is the shit you got to deal with. He wasn't ready for this, and not a lot of people were built to deal with the shit that came, but I'm glad all of that's over with. But his biggest thing is this new regime. He says there's a clear delineation in job responsibility. And this is the first time we've had it, whether you go back to Kyle and Mike, or I think they had it with a coaching staff, but up in the front office. And remember, Mike brought Bruce Allen here. So you can't fault anybody for Bruce turning into the tyrant that he ultimately became. You can't blame anybody but Mike for that. Mike brought him here to be his team president and general manager, right? Even though Mike and Kyle were really more in charge of personnel at that time, Bruce was starting to insert himself. And so eventually there was going to be a power struggle there. Eventually, I think it would have, maybe Mike's, his aura and his track record would have given him the authority to be able to box a guy like Bruce out. Obviously, we never got to find out, but we've never had the power structure the way that it is now. A healthy organizational power structure where, hey, this is your job title, this is your job title, this is your responsibility, this is and we just keep going down the line, and everybody knows exactly what is required of them. And that's what Logan talked about. We haven't had that. Jay didn't have that. Ron didn't have that. Mike and Kyle didn't have that. Maybe they had it to a lesser extent, but this is the first time we've had a GM, an assistant GM, and then everybody else kind of just fitting into their roles and knowing what their role is and their responsibility is and being able to do their job. Like I said, I told you guys this, and, you might go find somebody that might have had that title. I doubt it. We haven't had a run game coordinator here in Washington. I look around the league and teams have had run game, offensive pass game coordinators, defensive pass game coordinator. They've had these types of coaches in place for 5 to 7 years. We've never had that here in Washington. Yeah, the offensive line coach might have been the offensive run game coordinator too. Like, that's not the same thing. Okay. I'm talking about a guy who does nothing else but focus in on the pass game. That is his job. Coordinating the pass game, helping to dissect this week's opponent, what they don't do well and what we do well, and how we can take advantage of the shit that they don't do well or the things that we are really good at. Defensively, here's how we're going to attack this team's pass game from a defensive standpoint. That's what Joe Witt Jr.'s job was in Dallas. He was the defensive pass game coordinator. Okay? Under Dan Quinn. Like, that shit matters. It's really different here. It's really, really different here. Really different. We talked about play action and the explosive plays. I really wanted to get even nerdier with that. We did get to do it, and I'm hoping that the next time I talk to Logan, and there will be a next time, I really feel like he'll be willing to come back and chop it up with me again. I can get into that conversation. Hopefully, it's a moot point, and we start to see real explosive plays here, the play action working and being beneficial. Where I really wanted to go was play action marrying with the run game. That's something that we haven't had, and I wanted to get to that, but we didn't get to that. But he talked about his biggest thing is just getting explosive plays by putting the defense in conflict is his biggest thing. And that you hear that all the time around the league. But he said, look, play action is one way to do it, but it's not the only way to do it. And like he said, Jay had an ineffective play action because all Jay liked to do was run duo, which is part of the reason he and Bill Callahan didn't get along, because Callahan wanted to, run, more traditional rush offense. Jay wanted no parts of that. Jay wanted to run those quick hitting double teams up front, the duos, And it didn't allow for an effective play action fake, but Jay could still scheme it up, as Logan alluded to. Like, he still found ways to get explosive plays. And he talked about, the Lions and how they get explosive plays, the Dolphins and how they get explosive plays, and every team does it differently, but you just got to find ways to get explosive plays. And hopefully Cliff Kingsbury will be able to do that here in Washington, because it's hard to sustain offense. Part of the problem with us over the last 4 years with Rivera here, and the year prior with Jay, when he was on his way out, when we were one of the worst offenses, it felt like NFL history, bro. We went a whole month without scoring a touchdown. I mean, that's hard to do in the NFL, man. It's hard to go an entire calendar month without an actual touchdown being scored. We were atrocious in 2019. So the last 5 years, we've been abysmal offensively. And a lot of it is due to the lack of explosive plays. Because what having a lack of explosive plays does is it forces you to then have to sustain offense. Now you got to go on a 13-play, 74-yard drive. And that requires you to not make a mistake. And when you're not good on offense and you don't get explosive plays, you can't afford a holding penalty to make it 2nd and 17. You're not going to be able to dig yourself up out of that hole because you're not good enough on offense to do that. 2nd and 17 is nothing for Kansas City or Cincinnati, right? Or one of these offenses that's dynamic, Detroit or San Francisco. We can't be in 2nd and 17. Even though you got 2 plays to get 17 yards over the last 5 years, you might as well punt on 2nd down, because you're not getting 17 yards over the next 2. God forbid you end up in a 3rd and 15, 16, 17, 18 type of hole. You could punt on 3rd down. You're not picking it up, right? So he talked about just finding ways to put the defense in conflict and get explosive plays. And I'm hoping that Cliff is able to do that, because part of the reason we haven't been able to score 23 points a game and give our defense a chance on a weekly basis from an offensive standpoint is because we don't get enough explosive plays. Now you're forced to matriculate the ball down the field, and the mistake is going to happen at some point. There's going to be a batted ball at the line of scrimmage. There's going to be a sack. There's going to be a holding penalty. There's going to be a false start. There's going to be something that's going to derail the drive. And now you got to punt. I used to call from the 40 to the 40, the vortex. You guys remember that? I think if you were a member of the MOBB the last couple of years, when we would watch film, then you know about the vortex I would talk about, because we would get stuck from, like, we get 1 or 2 first downs, and then we get into the 40, from the 40 to the 40, our 40 to their 40. And somewhere in there, our drive would bog down. We'd make mistakes. We'd have penalties. We'd have a sack. We'd have something go awry, and we'd have to punt, right? You get explosive plays, and even if the drive doesn't end in you being in the end zone, guess what? You get a 37-yard play at your own 40. You get a 37-yard completion or a 37-yard run, you're in field goal range. Even if the rest of the drive doesn't go well, you're kicking a field goal. At least you're coming away with something. Too many of our drives start well, end disastrously, and we get nothing out of it. No points. So, yeah. He talked about Cliff Kingsbury's offense. I asked him about Cliff's offense. A lot of people associate Cliff with air raid, and rightfully so. That's his background, is in air raid, but he's adapted and adjusted in the NFL. And I've gone back and I've watched Cliff, and I watched him in real time when he was in Arizona, and he ran the football, and he did different things to adjust and adapt to the NFL game. There were knocks on Cliff about him not adjusting to the adjustments that were made to him. And that's true too, right? That's part of the reason why things didn't go well in 2022 and he ultimately got canned, is that he didn't adjust to the adjustments that were being made to him. Obviously, it doesn't help that Kyler Murray gets injured, but before Kyler Murray got injured, they were struggling on offense very badly. And he's another guy that I think he struggled with being the head coach. Another one of these, I think you're more likely to get an offensive guy struggling with the responsibility of being a head coach than you are a defensive guy. because a defensive guy is wired differently. He's going to be jacked in terms of the way mentally he conducts business. So he's not going to let anybody step on his toes because he's already got an aggressive mentality to begin with because he's a defensive guy, right? So that's, you don't have to worry about that with defensive coaches. It's the offensive guys. They're a little soft sometimes, right? And again, I'm not calling any of these dudes soft. I'm just talking about from a mental standpoint and being an authoritative figure. You know, when you're an offensive guy, you're so fixated on the offensive side of the football. You're not really worried about anything else. And sometimes you can get lost in trying to make your offense work that you're not really worried about all the other things that are going on. And I think that happened to Cliff too, which is why he said, hey, I'm not even trying to be a head coach right now. I'm just trying to have some fun, right? Because you can't have fun when you're the head coach. You got to worry about the entire team. If you're winning, it's fun. But if you really, truly want to have fun, you just worry about your side of the ball. That's fun, right? So I'm hoping that Cliff learned from his Arizona experience, take the things that, and you know, what he said about Cliff's offense to this point, what he's seen in OTAs, he said, I love the tempo that they're utilizing. He says, Cliff did a really good job of utilizing a mobile quarterback in Kyler Murray. We have one of those here, which is why it was a no-brainer pick to get Jaden Daniels on board here in Washington. And then he said, he's adapted to the NFL, right? He's taken bits and pieces from a number of different coaches. And, you know, it's a copycat league, right? So you integrate. I listened to Chip Kelly talk about, you know, his style of coaching. And he was like, you know, as a coach, you adapt and adjust. You see things you like. You're like, oh, man. And you try to integrate that into, he said, the only thing that sucks is if you're going to integrate something else new into what it is you do, you got to take something out. You can't have, you know, 1,000 different plays that you're running. That's impossible. So in order to bring something new in, you probably got to get rid of something old. And a lot of coaches struggle with that. But that's at the college level. You know, the NFL, you adapt and adjust. And the best thing that you can do is adapt and adjust to the talent that you have. In college, you can go out and recruit the type of player that you want to fit what it is you do. So you don't have to adapt and adjust. You go get the players that fit your scheme, right? In the NFL, it's a little bit different because you got to adapt and adjust to the players that you have. Sure, you can go out and try to, but it's not college. You're not recruiting the best athletes. You got, you know, certain players that you're picking from, a pool of players you're picking from, drafting, et cetera, et cetera. You got to fit what it is you do to what the players and the talent that you have on your roster suggest you should be doing. And he said he loves that Cliff has done a little bit of that. And he's also, you know, taking some stuff from Kyle, taking some stuff. He said he thinks there's going to be a heavy influence of Brian Johnson's Eagles run game, where they're pulling tackles and things of that nature, which is interesting because it led to a different conversation with the offensive lineman that we'll get to here in a second. I asked him, outside of Jaden Daniels, who was the rookie on the offensive side of the football that stood out to the most to him thus far. And he said that it was Luke McCaffrey. And I think the biggest nugget, you know, the biggest gem he dropped on our melon was when he said he thinks that Luke McCaffrey is going to return kicks for us. Okay. When he said it, I said, okay, wow. All right. That's different. And he's like, obviously nothing's set in stone and they haven't made any, you know, decisions on that. But he's like, just seeing his movement skills, understanding what his background is. And they've already told us they've paraded at least 12 guys back there during OTAs. I would assume he's one of them. That's the only reason Logan would even feel comfortable saying something like that. So knowing that he could potentially not only impact the game offensively as the third receiver, potentially, we'll see what Diami's role is. And, you know, he has to make the team first. I know some of you are saying that Diami's not even going to make the football team. We'll see. All right. We'll see about that. But whatever the case may be, Luke's going to make this team, and he could be the third option. He could be the fourth option at receiver, whatever the case may be. He could also impact this team on special teams if what Logan Paulson says comes to fruition. He could be returning kicks, and that'd be interesting because he's not Dax Milne, right? He's far from Dax Milne, right? Dax Milne never, ever, 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 ever in his life was a 4.4 guy. Luke McCaffrey is actually faster than his brother, Christian McCaffrey. So Luke's got some speed. He's got some physicality to him. If you've watched him play and you watched his tape, and all of those things bode well for you on these on this new kickoff, because as we've heard, it's almost going to be like a running play. And Luke has a background as a option quarterback when he was at Nebraska. So we'll see, right? We'll see. I thought that was interesting. He also talked about his work ethic, showing up early with Jaden and things of that nature, his professionalism and what he's done in these early stages to really show that he can be a contributor fairly early in his career. So I thought that was interesting, especially the part about him returning kicks. That one stood out like a sore thumb. So then in talking about the rookies on the offensive side, it led us to Brandon Coleman. He said that, remember, Chris Cooley said that Coleman was not ready to start, that he was a project, so to speak. I thought it was a bit harsh, but I also don't have a problem with somebody speaking their truth. If that's how you feel, and I tend to trust Chris Cooley if he tells me that a guy's a bit of a project, it doesn't bode well. And then it's one thing to hear it from a guy that's not there. If Chris Cooley 7 years ago said that, I'd be worried because Chris Cooley was at the park every day and he's watching these guys at OTAs and watching them practice. And so if he's telling me that he's got a ways to go, even without the pads on, I would be alarmed. But, he's just talking about what he watched at TCU and watching them from afar. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I get it. There's a reason why he was drafted in the 3rd round. He's not a, polished, well-rounded prospect, but he may be able to still help in his rookie campaign. But hearing Logan, who has been out there every single day, who has seen what Brandon Coleman has done from the time he was drafted to, heading into training camp, and he's like, I don't think he's ready yet necessarily. Obviously, and he did preface it by saying, look, I've seen guys, get to camp and the light bulb comes on, and all of a sudden somebody that I really didn't think was going to be a contributor is all of a sudden a key contributor. So you never know. And he's right. But right now, as it stands, it feels like Brandon Coleman isn't going to be a starting offensive lineman to start the season off. Now, that's not to say that we get into the season and things transpire and he doesn't get thrusted into action. But right now, it doesn't sound like Logan feels like he's ready to start as a tackle, and that's okay, right? That's okay. So that led us to the conversation about left tackle, and he said that it's hard to assess Brandon Coleman and the rest of these tackles because obviously the pads have not gone on, and we all know that to be true, that things change drastically when the pads go on for the guys in the trenches in particular. So with that said, a guy like Trent Scott, for instance, has gotten reps with the ones during OTAs. Again, don't get carried away with who's starting where and who's doing what with who. I mean, Jaden Daniels wasn't taking a bunch of reps with the ones. Most of the reps with the ones in OTAs went to Marcus Mariota, but we all know when we get to training camp, it's going to be Jaden Daniels for the most part, taking those reps. He'll be probably splitting some of those early on, but as camp wears on, they're going to, build up his stamina to where he's the number one guy and he's taking the bulk of the reps with the ones. It'll be interesting to see who starts camp as the starting left tackle, who's running with the ones at the beginning. And I think they're still going to be platooning guys in and out. We're not going to get a true sense of, but I think whoever they put out there first is who, they're kind of pseudo penciling in as the, starter for now, right? Obviously subject to change, but I'm interested to see who's going to get the first crack, because that's the guy that's going to have the best opportunity to start. It's essentially your job to lose at that point. And he mentioned Trent Scott getting some opportunities, and with the way that they're going to run offense, potentially with Brian Johnson having a big impact coming from Philadelphia and some of the things that he wants to implement from a run game standpoint, even the pass game and the screen game and things of that nature, you need athletic offensive linemen that can get out and get in front. That's a Brandon Coleman thing. That's a Trent Scott thing. He's a little bit more built to do that. Not necessarily a Cornelius Lucas thing, as Logan Paulsen alluded to. He's like, look, do you really want Corn Lucas living in a world where you got him pulling out and being a lead blocker, at 6, Cornelius Lucas is like 6'7", 6'8", like 6'6", 6'7", 6'8". He's a massive man. He's much better as a pass protector, but getting out in space, running, that's not his thing, right? So it really is going to depend on what they're trying to do. You can hide him in those situations because you can use him as a guy that seals instead of getting out in front, right? He can be the guy that pins, the block down and springs something instead of having to get out in front. But and in the pass game can, as Logan talked about, can shield him from some of that action too. And there's things you can do. I mean, I watched guys like Tyler Columbus and Corey Lichtensteiger flourish in 2012, under Kyle and Mike. These aren't starting offensive linemen. I mean, Lichtensteiger was, but not Tyler Columbus. But I watched him flourish and get the damn job done, right? So you're hoping that you can, do something like that. And we'll see. But I think ultimately the type of offense that they decide to run is going to determine who ends up being your starting left tackle. It's a free-for-all right now. Left tackle is very interesting because if you got 3 starters, you got no starter. I still think it's Cornelius Lucas when it's all said and done, but we will see. Anyway, then we had a tight end conversation. Because to me, if you got a former NFL tight end on the program talking to you, you have to ask about the tight end position or the position that he used to play, because he's going to have a keen eye for that position, what he's looking for, and what he thinks these guys are capable of doing. For the first time in a long time, I truly believe we have legitimate talent at this position, and we're going to cut a player who can play in this league at the position, which is not something we've been able to say in the past. So we talked about the tight end position. First thing I asked him was 3 or 4. What do you think they're going to keep? And he's like, well, it just depends on what kind of offense they want to run. I think our roster is set up to where if they can keep 3 or 4. Whatever they decide to do, they can do. Because again, we're in the infant stages of building this roster. Your goal right now should be keep the most talented players that you can. You shouldn't worry, irregardless of position. Obviously, you have to have a certain amount, right, to fill out your roster to be where you need to be from a game plan perspective, from a game day perspective, 53-man roster, et cetera, et cetera. I get all of that, but if you have 5 tight ends, and they're the most talented, and you only have 4, and that's not going to be the case this year, but in past years it was, where you only have 4 good linebackers. Keep 5 tight ends. Only keep 4 linebackers. Like, that's where we are. You're at the point of your roster construction where we don't have enough talent. No one's going to be able to convince me until I see us play in preseason games, and we'll be watching. That's another conversation for another day, but I think we're not going to see a lot of the starters in preseason. I'm just telling you, when you got joint practices, I think it lessens the likelihood that starters play in the preseason games, which is fine, because it'll give you a nice long look at some of these guys that are backups that are fighting for, roster for spots 45 through 53, and also the 12 or 15 practice squad spots that are available as well. But with that said, I think you can keep 4 this year. I think the number should be 4 this year. I don't think we're talented enough at other positions to where you can't keep a 4th tight end, if so be it. So Logan and I agreed that there's already 3 on the roster. barring any kind of setbacks, Zach Ertz is going to be on this team. Ben Sinnott is going to be on this team. And John Bates is going to be on this team. So none of those guys are in danger of being cut. The question is, if you're keeping a fourth, and we've had this conversation briefly before, if you're keeping a fourth tight end, who do you keep? What do you value? Cole Turner, pass catching ability, former wide receiver, the rawness, but the elite upside of a Armani Rogers. I don't think Colson Yankoff has a chance to crack the 53 this year, but I told you I'm enamored with him and his movement skills, and he's making this positional change from running back, which me and Logan both talked about was insane that he was even playing that position at UCLA. So he should have already had some tight end experience. He was poorly and absurdly miscast at UCLA as a running back. After he made the switch from quarterback, he should have gone to tight end, but whatever. He's here now. He's a tight end. He's got a long ways to go. I don't think he can make up enough ground to make this roster, but as we saw with Amani Rogers, all it takes is opportunity, and you never know. So I won't count him out, but if everything goes the way that it's supposed to go with health and things of that nature, Yankoff won't make this team, but I can see him being on the practice squad. And Zach Ertz won't be here next year. John Bates might not be here next year. I think Bates has, what is this the last year Bates? Was Bates 21? Feels like Bates was 21, along with Diami and Defoe and all of those guys, Cosme and all those guys who are going into the last year of their deal. This feels like the last year of Bates. I'm trying to think. Bates had to be 2021. He had to be. Maybe he was 2022. He feels 2021-ish. And if that's in fact the case, then this is his final year. So there could be spots available on this roster, at the tight end position next year. So, but if you're talking this year, Amani Rogers is that guy. You heard it in Logan's voice. Like Logan's like, yo, if he can get right, there's nobody else like him at the position. He's 6'5", 240 pounds, almost running a sub 4.5 40. He's physical enough. We saw that in his rookie season. He's physical enough to play the position, to catch the ball, to make things happen. But he plays like a tight end. He plays like a receiver. He runs like a wide receiver, but he's in a tight end body. So there's a ton of upside there. We haven't had a guy like that here athletically since Vernon Davis. I don't know about his route running ability or none of that, so I can't say Jordan Reed because Jordan was a different animal. Jordan also was only 6'2". He wasn't 6'5". So Amani Rogers probably is a tremendous athlete. Is he able to, get free, break a dude off at the top of a route and get open? Or is he just a guy that can run away from you, run up the seams and put pressure on the defense that way? Whatever the case may be, he's a different animal. I'd love to see him here, but got to stay healthy, right? But he did say that he really likes what he's seen out of Colson Yankoff at the tight end position. So that's worth noting. Then I finished up the interview by asking him about the undrafted guys that are out there. Him being a former undrafted player himself, he knows what it takes to crack a roster as an undrafted player. He knows, what it's supposed to look like. And the first part of that is passing the eye test, So you're in OTAs. There are no pads, so it's hard to make a bunch of splash plays this time of the year. But who are some of the guys that have caught your eye, right, that are undrafted that, you could see them potentially carving out a role for themselves and ultimately, again, this roster is wide open. When you got new management coming in, when you have the highest turnover rate of any team in the NFL, undrafted guys are part of this draft class. They're a part of the draft class. They're an extension of this draft class because it's wide open, unlike a team like Detroit or San Francisco, whose roster is largely already spoken for, and you only got space for maybe 4 or 5 guys at the back end of the roster. That's not us. Okay. Anybody can make this football team. Anybody. So I asked him, and he gave me 3 names, and then he gave me a cluster of guys. So the first guy named was Tyler Owens. He's like, yo, this dude looks like a freak. We talked about Tyler Owens out of Texas Tech, this big, physically imposing safety. He's a hulking figure. He is off the charts, 6'2", I believe, 220. Just physically built, tested off the charts, jumping, running, all that stuff. He is a one-of-a-kind freak athlete. Reminds me a lot of the USC safety, Taylor Mays, who came in here and everybody wanted to liken him to Sean Taylor because he was 6'3", 220, 25 pounds, could run. Aesthetically, he looked the part, but he wasn't the player that everybody thought he was going to be. Owens is super raw. He looks like he's just learning the game. And so he got a long way to go. But Logan's like, if he can ever figure it out, he could be a problem. And I think that's their thought process is we've got time with this kid. That's why we went out and got Jeremy Chin. That's why we drafted Dominique Hampton. We got time with this kid. We don't have to rush him. And if in 2 years he's ready to contribute, then we got something, right? We got something. Because Dan Quinn likes them fast and physical up around the line of scrimmage as safeties. He uses those safeties as pseudo backers, and he wants them fast and physical. He used the 205-pound safety in Marquise Bell last year, got the Cowboys' ass kicked in the run game. But, that guy made a lot of plays underneath, but ultimately he was too light in the pants. That's why a guy like Tyler Owens, that's why a guy like Jeremy Chin, that's why a guy like Dominique Hampton makes sense, because now you're talking 215, 220, 225, totally different animal we're talking about. And he's like, Logan said, every time Tyler Owens lines up, I'm thinking he's out of place. He looks like he's a, defensive end, but he's at safety. So he talked about him. He talked about Colson Yankoff, which we already talked about, but I like him too. I think he's got some special movement skills for the position, and it'll be interesting to see him in the preseason. And then he talked about Norrell Pollard, and that's a guy. Remember, I told y'all the defensive tackle out of Virginia Tech. I said he's got some juice to him, y'all. Go back and watch my undrafted free agent video. And there were a few guys that stuck out to me, and Norrell Pollard was one of them. Now, I said, the only thing about him, he's super undersized. He's like 6'2", 280 pounds. So he's undersized for the position. But you talk about somebody that can get off the ball, that can get into the backfield, that can be a penetrator, and that's how Dan Quinn likes him. Light, quick, and disruptive, right? We got the best of both worlds because we got heavy, athletic and disruptive. Normally, in order to get what we got in Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen, you got to get that in a 285-pound frame, 290. That was the problem in Dallas. They got all these 280, 85, 75-pound dudes rotating in, and Diggy, Zua, and all these dudes who are undersized defensive tackles. And now you're getting the ball rammed down your throat. We got 300-pounders inside. So that's not a problem. And if need be, we got John Ridgway, and I know some of y'all don't want to hear this, but for Darian Mathis, like, we got stuff. And now we just added another 300-pounder into the mix, and Johnny Newton. Like, we stacked at defensive tackle, and all of them can get in the backfield. All of them are athletic. All of them are, penetrating disruptors. We didn't have to go and find a 280-pound, which is what, has been his calling card throughout his career, going back to Seattle. Even Grady Jarrett, I think Grady Jarrett is probably over 300 pounds, but not by much. Those are the kind of defensive tackles he's, chosen throughout his career. And Norrell Pollard kind of fits that mold, severely undersized, but as Logan said, he is twitchy, is all get out. And I told you that watching the film, like, this dude is twitchy, man. It'll be fun watching him in the preseason. I wouldn't be shocked if he jumped off the screen at us. I don't think he can make this roster, but stranger things have happened. So anyway, and then he talked about the running backs. He said, you know, they brought in a bunch of dudes. We talked about them. The Austin Jones kid from USC. I like the Wiley kid from Arizona, Michael Wiley. He said, initially he just thought they're camp. He said he didn't want to call them camp bodies, but he didn't see, longevity and stick-to-itiveness with them here in Washington. He was like, I don't know. I might be wrong about them dudes. There may be a little something to them. He like, they can catch it out, especially Wiley. I don't see it with Austin Jones, to be honest with you, but I could be wrong about him too. It's Wiley that intrigues me, because I could see him being a more dynamic Austin Eckler. Like, he might not make the team this year, but he continues to impress. And then next year, Eckler's a year older. And, we signed Eckler to a 2-year deal. I don't see why he can't play 2 years here. I don't see the need to cut him next year and move on from him. But if he doesn't play well this year, or he doesn't stay healthy this year, all bets are off. Anything's on the table at that point. Because remember, Eckler's coming off of a rough season last year. So if he doubles down on that and he doesn't play well and he doesn't stay healthy this year, then, anything's in play. I can see Wiley being a younger version of Austin Eckler. That's kind of what he was at Arizona. I like him a lot. So anyway, that was the extent of the conversation. It was a great conversation, one that I enjoyed thoroughly. From the comment section, it seemed like most of you enjoyed the conversation thoroughly as well. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to hopefully talking to Logan again sometime in the future. But there's going to be a lot of intrigue here with this team. The rookies report on Thursday. We'll be toasting to the season. Remember, we're toasting to the season on Thursday. And we're toasting to the offseason that was, which was just a glorious, beautiful, almost heavenly offseason. We haven't seen one of these almost ever. So we'll toast to that. And then to humble beginnings, to what I think is the beginning of the start of something beautiful. So get your glasses out. Fill it with whatever you like. Milk is allowed this time around. Normally, we don't allow milk. You know what? I'm in a good mood. I'm in a really good mood this offseason, this year. I'm not ornery this year. Don't bring any milk in here. Not allowed. Nah, you bring whatever you want, man. That's how this offseason is making me feel right now. So we'll do that on Thursday. So much to get to. Looking forward to that. But I got a podcast tomorrow where I'm going to give out my pre-training camp NFC power rankings. So that'll be on the podcast tomorrow. So you see where the Commanders fall there. I'm going to do an NFC pre-training camp power ranking, an AFC one, and then I'm going to put the entire league together and give you a full NFL power ranking here on the LouieTeeNetwork. So check that out if that tickles your fancy as well. Somebody had brought this to my attention. I was going to check it out anyway, because we all had heard about Mike Sellers and his situation, 3-4 months ago, and how, badly he was doing, and he needed open heart surgery, and he had 20-something surgeries in the span of 3 months. And, that's what ultimately happened. But when we saw him, we saw the photo of him in the hospital with all these tubes hooked up. We're talking about big, powerful, strong Mike Sellers in the hospital, hooked up to all these machines, fighting for his life. And that shit was unfathomable for somebody like myself, who grew up watching Mike Sellers, this big, hulking, larger-than-life figure. When he would catch the ball, he would go, ha! I remember that Detroit Lions game. He caught a pass and just steamrolled the guy. I mean, boom! It looked like Jerome Bettis just plowing over a dude. Like Sellers was that guy, and to see him in that vulnerable state like that, shit was crazy to me. And so John Keim had him on the podcast here recently. He posted the video today about with an interview with Sellers, talking to him, and him kind of reliving his situation and how all of that kind of came to be and all the things that he's gone through and all the changes that have been made to his life now. And it was crazy to hear all of that stuff, man. Like, just wild, and what's crazy is he said that the doctors told him that had he not been in the type of physical shape that he was in, which, Mike Sellers is a gym rat, he said he would have been died. He would not have made it, because he said his heart was working at 20% capacity. Like, it makes me think of Jacoby Jones, who just passed at the age of 40. We're talking about age of 40. We just heard about Larry Allen, Hall of Fame guard for the Dallas Cowboys, passing at the age of like 53 or something like that. So it's amazing to see, these big, strong guys, or someone like Jacoby Jones, who last thing I know, he was coaching football. Like, he was in great shape. Like, I'm still waiting to hear what, the autopsy or, what the cause of death was for Jacoby Jones, because at 40 years old in the shape that he was in just doesn't make any sense. But to think Mike Sellers could not be here with us is wild, and it just, I need to practice what I preach, because I need to go to the doctor. When you're young, the doctor is not as important. As you get older, you need to start taking your ass to the doctor. I need to start taking my ass to the doctor. And if you're out there and you're of a certain age, you need to start taking your ass to the doctor if you're not already going. So I need to practice what I preach. I've been talking about finding a doctor, up in this DMV area. I don't really know where to start, where to go. I'm going to figure something out, because I need to go to the doctor, right? That shit is scary, man. You just don't think about these types of things happening, but that's some scary stuff. So listening to him talk about that is just a reminder that we're all human. And even if you feel like you're in great shape and nothing's wrong, just go to the doctor anyway, man. Like, don't wait until it's too late, or don't wait until, you feel something and then you go to the doctor. Be proactive with this stuff. Go get your checkups, go do the things. Like, I ain't gonna lie to you, I'm scared to get my colon clean. I don't want to do that shit, but I know I got to get my colon checked. I'm getting to that age now. I'm getting up there, man. I hate admitting this type of stuff, but that's real, right? So anyway, I digress. So that was, if you haven't checked out that interview, John Keim with Mike Sellers, you should check it out. It's good stuff. Anyway, I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that he's doing so much better. He looks good. He looks blessed. And I'm just glad he was able to make it through, right? So anyway, I digress. Let's get to the comment section, and then we'll get out of here for the evening. Sean Moore, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB. Sean writes, not only that, bro, he's taking a page out of Dan's book. Because when we got good, not only are our coaches going to get poached, but our front office people are going to go as well. Exactly. This is why it is imperative that you build a front office that can withstand guys getting snatched. Like, if we end up being good over the next 3 years, Jaden Daniels is legit. He's the real deal. And this defense transformed, and some of the pieces that we've drafted turn out to be studs. Mike Singh still, and Ben Sinnott, Brandon Coleman ends up being a key contributor. I honestly, The one guy out of day 3 that I'm looking at, I'm saying I just don't see a way he fails, just based off of the track record of Adam Peters and having Bobby Wagner here, right, is Jordan McGee. He's being poured into by Bobby Wagner. Adam Peters' track record with day 3 selections at linebacker / undrafted guys at linebacker off the charts and through the roof. Even, getting Fred Warner in the 3rd round, I believe it was. It's crazy. So I think Jordan McGee is going to be a stud here. So when you start coupling all that stuff together, and if there's success that follows, that's what happens. They're coming, right? Teams around the league are coming for our stuff. Look at what happened to Detroit. We took 2 of their personnel guys up off them. We didn't do that because, it's the Lions. They, we just want to grab. No, they went to the NFC Championship game and were within 6 minutes of going to the Super Bowl. That's what happens. People are coming for your shit now. So people have been poaching the 49ers front office and coaching staff for the last 3-4 years. They went to 4 NFC Championship games in the last 5 years and 2 Super Bowls. That's what happens when you have that type of success. People are coming after your shit. So in order to build a sustainable model, you've got to have the infrastructure to withstand somebody coming in and saying, hey, let me get your assistant GM. Lance Newmark, yeah, he's ready to be a GM. Let me get him up off you. Okay, if Lance is gone, we got 3 dudes down here that we feel really good about. Scott Fitterer being one of them, that we can just bump up the assistant GM and we can keep the party going, right? So you just got to understand that's the nature of the business. You want that. That means you're successful. You want people coming for your stuff. Don't nobody want your stuff if you trash, which is why we were always able to retain our stuff, because don't nobody want your shit. It's garbage. So it feels like we're building a situation where, hey, if somebody comes for our stuff, we insulate it and we can bump somebody up to take their spot. Like if they come for Cliff Kingsbury 2 years from now, Jaden Daniels wins Rookie of the Year, and we make the playoffs, next year, or hell, this year and next year, or don't make it this year, but we make it, almost make it this year, make it next year. Jaden killed it both years. Somebody's like, all right, Cliff, you ready again? All right, bro. You got a job with your name on it. All right, Brian Johnson, you ready for a OC job again? Here you go. Like, we feel like we have now the infrastructure to handle somebody getting a job. Whereas in the past, even though nobody was looking and checking for our stuff, I don't think we were prepared to deal with that shit, to be honest with you. So I agree with you, Sean. It feels like he came from San Francisco. He knows what it looks like. He knows what it means to have success and what having success means. It means they coming. Teams are coming for your stuff. So you better be prepared. He knew when he went to San Francisco, it was only a matter of time before he was going to become a general manager. He knew that. He was the assistant GM there, and he knew at some point, I'm going to become my own guy. I'm going to be running my own team. Money Shot 217. Thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Who writes, Louie T, great effing interview. LOL. Would have loved to have seen you through a knuckleball at Logan. Asked him if he ever got into a training camp fight. I had not that question, but I had a question where there was a beef. It wasn't with somebody on this roster, but it was somebody on another roster. But you can't start out like that. Like, he don't know me well enough, for me to be asking him stuff that might make him uncomfortable. So you can't jump off the deep end the first time you meet somebody, because that might make them feel uncomfortable and they be like, I ain't doing that shit again, right? Like, and so you gotta tread lightly. You can't be asking crazy questions, because there was a situation that I wanted to ask him about, but I said I'm gonna keep that one in my back pocket. If I talk to him enough times, I'll be able to ask him that, and he'll be upfront with me. If there's anything for him to add to that, he'll be upfront with me. If I don't know you, I'm gonna keep you at a distance. I'm gonna put a nice stiff arm out there, keep you at a distance. So I gotta make sure I do this the right way, right? Gotta go about it the right way. Hey, Logan ain't no punk. I'm pretty sure he's been in a scrap or two. Pretty sure he's been in a scrap or two. And then you add to the fact that he was an undrafted guy, and there's an extra chip on your shoulder at that point. So, Sean Moore, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Double up. Thank you for doubling up. My guy, Sean writes, that first game in Dallas, bro, we was tricking the out of them. The play action fake had them gone. They didn't know if we were running or passing. You're talking about that Thanksgiving game in 2012 against Dallas. They had no idea what the hell was coming. Aldrick Robinson's deep ball touchdown, there wasn't a Dallas defender within 10 yards of him. Like, they had no idea what the hell was going on. The Pierre touchdown, that was a good throw. Remember I talked about Robert and that crazy needle-eyed like precision in that rookie season. There were two Dallas defenders right there, and he had to throw the ball. It looked like it was behind Pierre, because remember, Pierre jumped in the air, reached behind him. And the thing I loved about Pierre is Pierre had Scooby-Doo feet. And what I mean by Scooby-Doo feet is, if you've ever watched Scooby-Doo, they jump in the air and their feet are moving, and as soon as they hit the ground, they take off. Pierre had Scooby-Doo feet. Like, Pierre jumps in the air, and the minute he hits the ground, he's at top speed. Like 2 steps, and he's at top acceleration. Same thing happened in that Saints game, the very first game of 2012, Robert's first game, Pierre's first game here, is Robert throws that high-ass pass against the Saints when he's griffining on the ground, arms up, like this. Pierre jumps in the air, snags that bitch out of the air. And as soon as he hits the ground, Pierre takes off, and they can't catch him. The thing that sucked was on that play, Pierre got his foot clipped, and he sprained his foot, and he was out for like the next 3 games or so after that game. But they couldn't catch him. And it's the same thing that happened in that Dallas game. He threw it behind Pierre, and we all was like, damn, that ball was behind him. No, that ball was perfectly placed. There were 2 Dallas defenders right there that would have picked it off had he thrown it where you think the ball should have gone. So he had to throw it behind Pierre. Pierre reaches back, plucks it, and as soon as he hits the ground, he takes off. They can't catch him, and Pierre runs for a touchdown. That play action had them Bazity in that game, though. But remember, it was not only the play action, because, the Shanahans, as Logan said, they got a PhD in the play action department. It was also the Robert and Alfred Morris show back there that had teams really, you had to key in on Alfred Morris. Like, Alfred Morris rushed for over 1,400 yards in that rookie season. Like, you had to key in on AM. Wake up, wake up, wake up. It's Alfred Morris. Y'all remember that, right? You had to key in on AM. And you really had to sell out to stop our rushing attack, whether it was Robert or Alfred. And if you didn't come up and if you weren't aggressive, you were going to get beat. And the minute you took a false step, now Pierre's running behind you on that 12-yard drift route. Now Robert's pulling that bitch out, quick little delivery, and Pierre's hurting you, run after the catch. Or Josh, what's my man's name? Joshua Morgan, right, is hurting you on that shit, right? Like, it was again, good times. So yeah, man, they had no idea. Dallas, it was 28-3 at halftime of that game. And I just remember I was giving my dad the business at halftime. I'm running laps around him. He's sitting in the recliner. I'm doing laps around him. He's silent, radio silent. But you remember Dallas came back in that game and made shit interesting. So much so that they kicked an onside kick and we had to recover that bitch. He was talking a lot of shit, mega shit in the second half. And I was just sitting there, heart beating 1,000,000 miles per second. Remember, we're up 28-3 at the end of the first half. We only scored 10 points in the second half. That ended up being like a 38-31 game. So they had all the momentum in the second half, but we made enough plays to keep them at bay and ultimately secure the victory. So that was a lot of fun. Sean Moore, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. My guy Sean writes, bro, interview was hot like Dylon. I rip and I rhyme. I rhyme and I rip. This is the way that Dylon spits. Dylon, and Dylon. Maybe the CBK can be on soon since you got Logan. Anything is possible, but summer series is coming to a close here shortly because once training camp gets kicked off, then we back to business. So there are not going to be too many more episodes left in the summer series, but there's always next year for the summer series, and I'm not closing any doors, and you never know who's going to end up on the summer series, right? So I appreciate you, Sean, and I'm glad you enjoyed the interview. Door Gunner, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB. My guy Door Gunner writes, got to meet Mike at a Redskins rally before a Bucks game way back. Super nice guy. Can't believe he said he flatlined twice. Twice he said he flatlined. He's like, I didn't even remember a lot of what happened at the hospital. Like, my wife showed me video. He said his wife showed him videos of him playing catch with his kids in the hospital. He's like, I don't remember none of that. He said, I flatlined twice. He don't remember, he don't know anything about none of that stuff. He was like, it's just crazy, all the stuff that he went through and all the surgeries. I think he had 24 procedures in total. And then open heart surgery, obviously. And he said he's taken, I think he said it like it was nothing. He's taking like 20 to 23 pills a day or something like that. Like, that's what he's got to do for the rest of his life. Like, that's crazy. But, he said he feels as normal as he's felt in a long time. So, I mean, it's all good, man. It's just a blessing to hear him say that I feel good. I feel like I never had surgery, which is great. So, a couple of times in that interview, he had to compose himself because you could tell he was fighting. Look, man almost died. The part that almost took him out was when you start talking about not being here for your wife and your kids and just having to think about that. Like, you was almost not here. Your wife was almost a widow. Your kids almost didn't have their dad. That's some scary shit to think about. So, yeah, that was a wild interview, man. It's crazy that his situation deteriorated as quickly as it did, but I'm glad that he went to the doctor when he did, because he easily could have been Jacoby Jones. We could have easily been sitting at home prepping for the draft and heard that, former Redskins fullback Mike Sellers passed away from heart failure at the age of 40 or some shit like that, 43 or 44. That shit would have blew our minds. Are you kidding me? So glad that he went to the doctor when he did, and they were able to save his life. It's crazy. Christopher McLaughlin, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB. My guy Chris writes, thank you as always. Really appreciate you as always, Chris, who writes, hey Lou, hope all is well with you and the family. Likewise, as always, same with you and yours. Hopefully everything is good in your neck of the woods. Really appreciate you, Chris. Enjoyed the interview. Thank you. Glad that you did. 2 questions. 1, besides Cosme, do you think we have any player on our team that's top 12 at their position now? Second question. Do you think Joe Gibbs is a top 5 or 10 all-time head coach? Second one is easy. Yes. He's top 10, and I think he's a top 5. You could argue that if we're putting together a Mount Rushmore of head coaches in the NFL, Joe Gibbs could be on that Mount Rushmore. No other head coach in NFL history has won 3 different Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. Nobody else has done that. Generally, if you've won multiple Super Bowls, then you've done it with one quarterback, or it's kind of like dynastic in that you had a guy that was able to help you get to those levels, reach those levels. I know Bill Parcells won Super Bowls with 2 different quarterbacks, Sims and Hostetler, but nobody else has done it with 3, right? When you think about teams who've won multiple championships in a short period of time, Joe won 3 Super Bowls in 9 years. Generally, it's with this like Bill Walsh, Joe Montana, right? Jimmy Johnson, Troy Aikman, Chuck Noll, Terry Bradshaw, right? Like, if you won multiple chips, it's usually because you had a dude at quarterback. You had a guy that got you there and got you there again and again and again. We didn't have that. And for Joe, and not only did Joe win with 3 different quarterbacks, Joe won in strike shortened seasons where he coached scab players, and we were the only team to not have players cross the picket line. So we're playing with replacement players, and we're beating teams like Dallas, and that team, those replacement players got us to the playoffs. We won a Super Bowl that year because we didn't have any players cross the picket line, and our replacement guys got coached up and were good enough to beat NFL players. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody else did that. So, hell yes, Joe Gibbs is not only top 10, he's top 5 in my book. So, besides Cosme, do you think we have any player on our team that's top 12 at their position right now? So you could argue Terry McLaurin is in the discussion at receiver at top 12. I don't think he's in the top 12, but you could make that argument. And I know there's a lot of, Commanders fans that will make that argument. Oh, hell yeah, Terry's in the top 10. I'm pretty sure I can come up with 12 receivers that are better than Terry McLaurin, but he's in that discussion. Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen are definitely, I would say you can't find 12 better defensive tackles than both of those guys, especially Deron Payne. When Payne is on his game, I think Payne is definitely that guy. Jonathan Allen, could be that for some of you out there too, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. He's the level of consistency. That's the thing about Jonathan Allen, is his consistency has been greater than that of Deron Payne, but the flashes of greatness from Payne are much greater than that of Jonathan Allen. So I'd say Payne. 11.5 sack season. It's not a lot of defensive tackles in the league doing that kind of stuff. He's got to do it again, though. That's the thing, is Justin Madubuike had a 12, 13.5 sack season, whatever it was last year. He got this big deal. Now I want to see if he does it again, right? That's the mark of a truly elite player, is do it again. Like, okay, you did it once. Do it again. If he can do it again, now we can start to have that conversation about Deron Payne being one of the best defensive tackles in football. But I'd be hard-pressed to find, 12 guys better than him. So I'd say Deron. I think that's it. Honestly, if you go through the rest of the positions, obviously we don't have anybody at quarterback yet. We don't have a running back that fits that criteria. We already talked about Terry being, a guy that could be in that conversation at receiver. We don't have a tight end in that discussion. Cosme, as you mentioned, the only offensive lineman that could probably fit into that discussion. On the defensive side, we've talked about the 2 defensive tackles. got nothing else on the defensive line. We don't even have really a starting defensive end outside of Dorrance Armstrong. So linebacker, Bobby Wagner once upon a time. Bobby Wagner might still be a top 12 linebacker, when it's all said and done. But linebacker's a tough one because are we just talking about like middle backers? Are we talking about weak side backers, strong side back? Are we talking about edge rushers who are actually linebackers, but they get after the quarterback? Like TJ Watt is considered a linebacker because they play a 3-4 and he's standing up, but he's really a defensive end, but he's a linebacker, right? So that's a convoluted situation at linebacker, but I'd probably say no for Bobby Wagner at this point. But if you wanted to make that argument, I'm listening. We don't have a safety and we don't have a corner. So it's probably Daron Payne and Terry McLaurin are the two. And Terry's not top 12. I can tell you that right now. We sit here and make a list. Terry wouldn't be in the top 12 of the wide receivers in the NFL. And then in the case of Daron Payne, I don't think you can name 12 defensive tackles that are better than him. So I think he'd be the only other guy right now, or Jonathan Allen for that matter. So that's, I think, the extent of that. But that's where we are. We got to get to a point where we acquire more talent to where that's not the conversation anymore, where we got one or possibly two blue chippers or three blue chippers. We got to get to the point where when they start talking about Pro Bowl, we got 6 of those dudes and we got 2 all pros. And we got another 2 or 3 dudes that easily could have made it and guys that are on the cusp. Like, that's what we got to start trying to build. That's what the 49ers are. That's what the best teams in football are. They're teams that do that kind of stuff. And that's not where we are right now. So we'll see. That's what we're trying to be. It all takes time. And it's hard to skip steps. A lot of y'all want to skip steps. A lot of y'all want to be good immediately. And there's nothing that says we can't skip steps. There's nothing that says we can't be good immediately. It's just highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. And again, a lot of you want to, use the Texans as a barometer. My thing is, we don't play in the Texans division. We have Dallas and Philadelphia in our division. This isn't the AFC South where anything goes and it's Jacksonville and Indy and, those teams, right? And Tennessee, this is a real deal division. And so we'll see what happens. But nonetheless, that's going to do it for me. Your man, Louie T, here on this installment of the Command Post. Thank you guys for joining me. I look forward to chopping it up with you guys on Thursday night. That's going to be a hell of an episode. I'll be promoting the hell out of that one. I want everybody in attendance, if you can be here. If you can't be here, watch it on playback and support. But we going to toast to the season, man. I'm going to tell you this much. I'm going to enjoy the hell out of this season. It's going to be hard for me not to enjoy this season. The only thing that would allow me to not enjoy this season is if Jaden Daniels isn't any good or something happens to him. Those are the only two things. Other than that, as long as he's upright, he's healthy, he's playing well, however the season goes, I'm just going to enjoy the ride. We'll talk more about that on Thursday, though, as we toast to the season. We toast to the offseason that was. What a magnificent offseason. I don't know if we could have planned it much better. It didn't start out that way, but we'll talk about all those things on Thursday. Again, I'll be having my NFC power rankings tomorrow night on the podcast. So if you're interested in that, check that out. But we'll be back. I'll be actually having a podcast 2 days in a row, Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll do AFC on Wednesday, and then Friday. I don't know if I'm actually gonna be out of the office on Friday, but I may do an upload for you guys to put it all together on Friday. And so we'll see about all of that. But anyway, I digress. You guys get out of here. I'll see you guys on Thursday. For some of you, I'll see you on the podcast tomorrow night. For the rest of you, I'll see you on Thursday night. Command Post Live when we toast to the upcoming season and the offseason that was. Look forward to it. Until then, y'all know what it is. Post up. Take command. Really appreciate all the support of the summer series. It's similar to last year with the Reign of Terror. It's gaining like a cult following, and I really appreciate y'all supporting the summer series and all of the endeavors that come out of the LouieTeeNetwork. And so really truly do appreciate y'all for the support, and I ask that you continue to support the movement. And I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one. God bless. Good night.